So what do you think? Do we look alike? Yes? No? Maybe? Oh well. We'll talk about my friend here in a minute. By the way, this is not a real skull. It's plastic. Got it on Amazon for I believe 1995. So I'm going to share my screen now. Now you can see the PowerPoint presentation, and we are going to talk about the early biological theories of crime. Now, these theories roughly were hypothesized in the second half of the 1800s, and the most prominent figure in all of these theories is Cesare Lombroso. So you see the covers of two of his most significant books, Criminal Man and Criminal Woman, the Prostitute and the Normal Woman. So I also have both of these books. I really like the one that was published by Duke because it has the different editions in it. So you can see the different editions that the book went through, and it went through several. The thing about Cesare Lombroso is that he believed that criminals were atavists. Atavists were throwbacks to evolution. Now, if criminals were throwbacks to evolution, he also believed that we could determine who was atavistic based on their physical features. So there are two images in this slide, one of skulls and one of faces from Lombroso's work. So let's look at some of his theories. So you already know about the atavists. Well, he believed that there were two different types of male criminals. First was the born criminal. These were the atavists, the throwbacks to evolution. Kind of think in terms of recessive genes, only this recesses way, way back, millions of years. And then think of criminaloids and the mentally ill as those individuals who commit minor offenses because of their environmental circumstances. So these physical characteristics that Lombroso claimed could be used to identify atavists, he called stigmata. I'm going to stop my screen share here for just a minute, because if you see this book, it's called the Malleus Maleficarum, the witch hammer. This is a manual that was used in the witch hunts. It was used to ferret out all the witches back in the olden days. Okay, and stigmata were a big part of this book, of the witch hunts. So they would look for things like birthmarks. Well, Lombroso believed that if he could find 5 stigmata in a person, that would mean that they were an atavist. So these are the physical characteristics. Now, some things to keep in mind about Lombroso, that he's doing a lot of this stuff post-mortem. He's looking at things post-mortem, but at least post-crime. So he's finding people who've committed crime, and then he's comparing them to other people that he did not believe had committed any crime. But he would look at all sorts of things like different sizes of body parts. So you can see in this slide that his list would change frequently, but some of the things you looked at were the nose, are they large or small, the eyes, the jaws, all sorts of things like that. So I'm going to stop the screen share again. See, this is a caliper. So the caliper can be used to measure all sorts of things. So if I turn it upside down this way, then the bridge of my nose, I can measure the eyes, the ears. Now this particular caliper will not measure jaws or skull, but we will see a picture of one that will here in just a minute. So tattoos were one of the stigmata, according to Lombroso. Well, keep in mind that tattoos were voluntarily added. Now, we might think to us today that he would automatically be able to logically tell, but keep in mind that he could have also had this belief that even though a tattoo is voluntarily added, the presence of it is a sign of a mental process choosing to have the tattoo that is related to this concept of being atavistic. So very important to understand that. So Lombroso also wrote the book, The Criminal Woman, The Prostitute, and Normal Woman. Notice the categories are different than for men. And notice that he includes normal woman in the title of the book. So by today's standards, Lombroso was racist and sexist. And he should have been by the standards of the day then. Okay, so we're really talking about free will versus determinism. So Cesare Beccaria believed in free will, meaning that we could make our own choices. Determinists believe that our behavior is determined by our circumstances. And in the case of biological criminology, by our biological circumstances. So Lombroso believed that that criminals were not fully biologically evolved the way the rest of us are, and that lack of being fully evolved, as evidenced by the stigmata, determined that this person would be this way. Quite frankly, I think most of us believe in a combination of determinism and free will, meaning that we believe things influence where we get to, but that we can still make different decisions. We don't have to make those decisions. So let's look at some other things. So I want you to see this slide really quickly, and I'm going to bring it back up here in just a minute, but we're going to stop the share. So let's start with the phrenology head. Okay, you can feel the bumps on the head and no, okay. That is scientific bunk. It is pseudoscience, but believe it or not, during the early days of biological criminology, there was a belief that these bumps could determine things like that. Now, yes, a pediatrician doing a newborn baby visit is going to look for bumps in the head because they're going to look to make sure that the sutures are present. Because if they're not, if the 3 plates of the skull, and let me see if I can get it where the light, for the light so you can see it. So this is a suture. This is a suture. So in newborns, these are not fully connected or hardened yet. In other words, the bones come together, but they're not really totally connected. Now, by the time you get to be my age, okay, you can't even feel the suture part through my scalp. It just feels like one big hard bone. Now, a trained physician might be able to feel them, but I can't. I don't do this on a regular basis, right? I might do this, but it's not, that's not something that determines criminal behavior, okay? Now, so we've got this, we've got the skull, but I also want to show you something else. Now, there's a picture of Leonardo DiCaprio, and he played a doctor in the South around the time of the Civil War, and he gives this impassioned speech, and he plays a doctor that's a racist. He gives this impassioned speech where he talks about structure in the skulls of slaves right about here, how that is different than it is in white people. And that proves, according to him, that one race is superior to the other, that white people are superior to black people. Well, it makes an assumption that a bone structure has something to do with intellect when it does not. It is completely logically oblivious, meaning it's oblivious to any logic, okay? But it just doesn't hold water. That logic does not. So you see the phrenology head, you see, I forgot to mention the brain volume. There were researchers at the time that on dead people, they would put different things in the skull to measure the volume, and they, knowing how much space was usually there between the skull and the brain, they would estimate the brain volume. And then you see the skull size, a caliper that would be used to measure that. That same caliper would be used to measure the jaws or the width of the face, things like that. And by the way, there in the middle is the picture of Leonardo DiCaprio playing this particular position. Okay, so let's just talk briefly about IQ testing. Alfred Binet was a Frenchman who brought IQ testing to the fore. Now, he believed that our IQ could change over the course of our lives. His work is still in use today and is subsumed into the Stanford Binet inventories, which are IQ tests. Okay, now H.H. Goddard took Binet's work and applied it in a way that is not logically tenable, not logically defensible. So he would test the immigrants coming through Ellis Island. Now, just so you know, Goddard, for most of his life, did not believe that IQ could change. As late as the 1970s, when I was in high school, we were being taught IQ does not change over the course of a person's life. Now, Goddard did change his mind about this later in his life. He believed that the biggest threat to humanity was morons, and that was actually a diagnostic term. It was an official term for diagnosis at the time. So what he would do is he would give IQ tests to immigrants coming through Ellis Island. Some of them could not read the language that they were of the test that they were taking. So Goddard would give the test in English, but sometimes in other Western European languages. Well, keep in mind that Slavic peoples and other folks from Eastern Europe and from other continents may not be able to read the Western European or English languages. So if they scored in the range to make them a moron, according to the diagnostic categorization of the time, it was likely because they simply couldn't read the test because it was a different language than they could read. But Goddard didn't consider that, it seems. So people that could speak broken English maybe, but really couldn't understand the test, were given the test. And they might have understood some of the things, but not all of the things. And so a lot of folks coming in at Ellis Island were determined to be morons that weren't. It's very important to understand that. So what are some policy implications of biological theories? Well, the two columns really look at, in this slide, really look at what would the implications be for the 1800s versus what would we see them today. So if biology is destiny, if Lombroso is right, if crime and delinquency is innate, meaning it's determined by being an atavist, then offenders are not going to be deterred by fear of punishment. In other words, Lombroso's work rejects Beccaria's work. But also, it means that psychological interventions are not going to work either because these things are biologically determined. So crime can only be addressed through medical, chemical, and surgical procedures. Now, this would have some very horrific implications in social Darwinism and eugenics that we're going to talk about in the next video. But just a list of some of the things that were done, from the lobotomies forced sterilization, surgical and chemical castration. Even in modern times, there are folks, there's a state here in the US that will allow a child molester to shorten their time if they voluntarily submit to chemical castration. Okay, if these things do work, like frontal lobotomies, they work by dehumanizing the person. Forced sterilization works by dehumanizing the person. Now, some of the modern implications is that we tend to view offenders as being less culpable because of their biology having such a strong influence on their behavior. A lightening of punishment, that we're not talking about lightning from a storm, it means lessening of it, making it lighter, a lightening of punishment. And the very last one, treatment with right to refuse. So if we lighten the punishment and provide treatment in place of the punishment that we're taking away, then we're being more humane to that person. But we always have to allow a person to refuse treatment, except in very rare circumstances. But there's a belief that biology does not lead to innate traits. In other words, biological criminologists don't believe that these things are untreatable. But it also means that we develop more prevention programs. Okay. All righty, so I want to thank you all for watching this video, and we will see you next time.